Okay, let's make a start. Thank you again for all of those people who have arrived on time. Let's get started. There'll be more and more people who will be joining us throughout the course of the today's AGM, but I want to thank you all for attending. Hopefully you can hear me okay, and that's sort of going all right. Maybe you can clap or react to make sure that my sound is coming through and you can hear us okay. Yep, thank you for Mark for the nice thumbs up. Thank you everyone for that. Okay, so and you can all see the screen okay. Another thumbs up to make sure everyone can see the screen okay. Thank you, Garth. Thank you, Mark, again. All right, let's roll. So I want to formally open the AGM for the Property Investors Council of Australia at 1:02 Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time, and I just will talk us through the agenda. We've obviously got all of our formalities around our apologies and proxies and establishing our quorum. I will then go through the chair report, giving you a summary of basically what's happened throughout the course of the year. Then also look at the financial reports. We'll move into general business, also potentially seeing whether we get any questions that are available from obviously our valued members such as yourselves. And then I want to talk about how we can continue to try and build out the association to continue to build its relevance and importance in a very, very interesting and changing market. So John's got his hand up. So John, is that a question you have, or are you raising your hand for any other reason? Go to the Q&A. No, it looks like it's down now. Okay. Anyway, we'll make a start. So moving right along. So to establish, as per the Corporations Act and also our own constitution, the apologies first. In terms of our board members who aren't able to make it today, I had apologies from Mary, and I believe Kieran is also still away at this point in time. So apologies for our national board members who can't join us today. Others will be joining, I suspect, as we go throughout the course of today's proceedings. I'm pleased to say we needed to get 3% of our voting membership base, so we're able to do that. We've got 145 proxies received by Saturday, which was the closeout time for those proxies to be delivered. So I can confirm that we've established a quorum and the meeting can proceed as planned. In terms of the chair report, I wanted to make sure I welcome our new members and revisit some of our backstory as part of that particular story as well. I'm just admitting people as they come in, so I'm a one-man show here at the moment, so that's why my eyes are wandering everywhere. So just a little bit of backstory. In late 2017, PICA was formed for property investors, run by property investors for the benefit of property investors, as opposed to self-vested or commercial interests. So we wanted to make sure that that there was a voice and also some education available out there for property investors, as opposed to someone trying to sell you something or have a commercial agenda attached to it. In terms of establish, to support, educate, and the voice for the 2.5 million property investors in Australia was our grounding foundations. And these are the important core values in which we run the national board and basically how we want to build out the association over time. So we're advocates for our members. We want to make sure we educate them around pros, cons, risks, responsibility of investing in property, in building out your accommodation business. We obviously want to make you aware of opportunities as they present themselves. We want to heavily involve ourselves in government decision making and engagement, as well as the community engagement. We're seeing, obviously property investing and rental accommodation being very politicised at the moment. So we want to make sure that we're involved in that discussion. And obviously, in terms of our view, we want it sustainable. As small business accommodation providers, we want to basically make sure that the market is sustainable for people who are investing in property, but also more broadly to add value to the community and the overall benefits of the society in Australia. Non-solicitation is a big one. We don't want businesses coming in here advertising their wares associated with, what they do. So we're very protective of your interests. Again, the association is run by investors for the benefits of investors. We want to collaborate and we want to be a trusted source of information for you to be able to make informed decisions or potentially work with trusted partners if you so wish. In terms of our policy positions, they have not changed. They've been relatively consistent for several years. And as more and more information becomes available, we'll continue to keep educating you and communicating to you about those policy positions. But we don't believe there should be any changes to negative gearing. As running a small business, we should be entitled to the same tax concessions as other small business operators. Capital gains exemptions, there might be some flexibility around that in terms of removing speculation in property. We think that is a good thing for the long-term benefits of the Australian economy and also for obviously the businesses that run private accommodation. So an idea here is to have, the 50% concession built in over 5 years, as opposed to just having it after the first 12 months. We think it's a significant disadvantage for property investors to not be able to claim travel expenses. So if you're a property investor and you buy property through a company name, you can claim all of those deductions for travelling and inspecting your property interstate. But obviously, if your property's bought through an individual's name, we can't claim any of that. So we've got a position on that to $500 for interstate per annum and also $250 locally to inspect your asset. I think that's fair and reasonable. Oops, jumping ahead. Depreciation. We are strong advocates for the belief that if a property is only 6 months old, but you're the second buyer of that property, you should still be entitled to write off the effective life of those fixtures, fittings in that property. In terms of property investment advice, we want to see that regulated. There's still too many cowboys and cowgirls in the industry who are driven by big incentives for themselves as opposed to the benefit of the customer. So we want to make sure that property investment advice is regulated, and obviously that then means full disclosure of those kickbacks, commissions, fees, soft dollar payments that occur. And then when we think about the lending arrangements, pre 2017, 2018, property investors were offered the same interest rates as owner-occupied buyers were. And so we think also that should be the case. But there's a lot of sort of pressure associated with banking and APRA and all of that, where that's allowed the banks to potentially raise the interest rates for interest only and also property investors. And we don't think that's fair. And so there should be some further considerations around that as well. Moving along, I'd like to introduce you. This is the national board here. We've got a couple of members in New South Wales, a couple of members in Queensland, and we've got Garth in WA, and I'm basically holding up the flag for Victoria. We obviously want to have, on the national board, we want to have representation across Australia, those other states and territories as well. You can see there underneath that, we've then got obviously our state executives that we want to try and build out. And then underneath that, we've got our sort of regional area locations that we want to start to build out those types of those opportunities. So if you think about, the Country Women's Association is a classic, an association that's been around for over 100 years. We've sort of modelled our model around those sort of area chapters, and then obviously the state councils, and then ultimately the national board as part of that particular story. Moving into the chair report itself now. As of today, we've got 2,655 paid up financial individual and associate members. If we look at those numbers, we can see that that's 2,616 for individual members and 39 associate members, which is businesses, and also reminding those businesses aren't able to vote. Remember, this association is all about looking after the direct property investor themselves, so they won't be able to ultimately take control over the association as it continues to grow, and that is by design. Moving along now, we can see we're into our 7th year. Looking at some of the work we've been doing from an educational point of view, this year we continued our webinar series. Those remain on demand in our catalogue of webinars that we've done over the years on the website. We've continued to build out those resource content on the Picker website, so you can download lots of rich content, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later. In terms of our newsletters, we call the Picker Update. You would have seen that was released earlier today as well. If you didn't get a copy of that, just send an email to info@picker.com.au, sorry, picker.asn.au, and we'll basically get that looked after for you. In terms of the health of the association, look, we're up for the fight. for fairness and obviously recognition for the important role we play as accommodation providers. But there is some challenges. Ultimately, we'll always have these. We run off the smell of an oily rag. So our financials do remain very tight in regards to, the money that we have in bank to perform the duties that we do perform. Membership growth is still, sluggish and remains challenging. So we've got to be able to find ways to bring new members into the association. Also, in terms of our resource and support volunteers for our state advisory councils and our area chapters, they're going to be quite important as we, continue to build out the progress of building out the scale and size of our operation. And yeah, I've been, the founding chair of this association for 7 years. I'm very keen to bring fresh, new ideas and new energy into the association. I'll actively remain on the board, but there needs to be a succession plan in terms of what's happening with me as the chair to bring some of those fresh ideas and that new drive into the association as well. In terms of our lobbying efforts, and I think, this is probably, the main value for in terms of the financial considerations and the impact to the value for our assets that can be impacted heavily by government intervention and decisions that they make. So we'll continue to lobby for that fair go for property investors. And you've noticed potentially in the language that I'm using today as part of this AGM and the language that I'll continue to keep using into the future is this small business private rental accommodation providers. So you'll hear me talk a lot about that because in terms of the narrative that's being shared by certain political parties and just the general public narrative around greedy property investors, what people don't forget or don't realise is that, yes, we are running small businesses and those small businesses provide rental accommodation. And so it's really important that we don't get that conversation and that narrative hijacked by political interests. And obviously those people, potentially advocating for other changes to the property investment space. So it really is important that we talk about these small businesses because that's what we are. Now, what do we have? I just want to highlight some of those lobbying efforts because we've had some terrific wins, but we've also had some challenges around, what's happening from the voting public, and then obviously the changed agenda that might come into government from that. So the national rental freeze and rental cap, fortunately, that's been a win for us for now. We haven't seen any radical policy changes in that particular space. So that's good news for the time being. In terms of rental increase restrictions to once every 12 months, we're seeing most states and territory roll over to that. There are some mixed views in terms of the outcome for that. So, part of us sort of say, look, once a year should be adequate. But if you've got a rental rollout that's occurring and you've had a long-term tenant and they're moving on, we do believe that there should be an opportunity for those, sort of owners to make considerations around increasing the rent to market value inside that 12-month period. So a bit of a mixed view on that one. A nice win over in Western Australia in regards to the no grounds eviction. So they still remain in place. So the property owner still remains in control of their accommodation. And I think that's a really important one. We've seen obviously that legislation change in Victoria, which has radically transformed the desire for investment in Victoria. And we're starting to see those numbers really start to show up in terms of reducing amount of rental supply in the Victorian marketplace. And we believe that that's a contributing factor in terms of why, the appetite for investment into Victoria continues to fall. In terms of, getting more local, we're seeing some councils think about increasing rates for investment properties. So, we start to see that sort of happening again. The property investors continue to keep forcing to make higher cost payments, which ultimately result in higher rents. So what we're seeing here is the councils had backed off. So that was a nice little win in the local Cairns council area. And to those people up in Cairns at the moment who are struggling through very difficult times through floods and so forth, our thoughts and prayers go out to you at this time. In terms of South Australia, we still have a live debate going on around their tenancy reforms. We did have some losses. Victoria is very much a basket case in regards to the current debt levels that they have. And so the government of the day is looking to increase the land tax threshold, bringing it down to being implemented, the zero value of land. We've seen obviously also a premium stamp duty introduced to properties with values over $2 million to obviously recover some of the debt that the state has got itself into through poor economic management. In terms of APRA, we also see a 3% buffer rate remains in place, which is a restriction for investors who potentially want to invest at the moment but can't because of servicing calculators are too aggressive. Especially we're at the top of the interest rate cycle. So that's very difficult and we'll continue our lobbying efforts there. In terms of interest rates, I mentioned this before, but investors paying an unjustified interest rate premium. The greater risk is actually on owner-occupied side than it is on investor side. That's evidence-based, not necessarily hypothetical, which is what APRA and the Council of Financial Regulators are arguing. I like to base it on, what's been historical performance as opposed to what they're saying is the future risk. In terms of government concessions, we're seeing, especially here in Victoria again, super funds, people who are looking to build bulk, build to rent type of accommodation are getting tax concessions for 40 years. So they're making it easier for them to run their accommodation businesses. But for the small independent accommodation business, we don't seem to get the same type of incentives or benefits associated with that. They continue to put the costs up for us in terms of that. Yet we also know through evidence-based that we run a more efficient rental accommodation than most of these larger rental providers as well. So go figure. All right, moving along now to the financial situation of the association, and this is where it is, quite challenged. You can see here in terms of the 2021-22 results versus 22-23 results. Whilst we had a significant improvement on income, obviously there are always costs associated with running associations, even though we are a non-for-profit association. Just by way of example, our indemnity insurances for all of the directors, so the directors carry risk associated with being part of an incorporated business in Australia. So we have some insurance policies that are paid for on behalf of those directors. But you can see the importance of the donations revenue that came through as we were doing those lobbying efforts to be able to, eke out a profit of $1,024 for the year. So again, very clear that we run off the smell of an oily rag. We still have member fund deficits. So to start the association, we were granted funds from the Property Investment Professionals of Australia. I think it was around $15,000 to establish the constitution and all the legal fees, build the website, get the technical support behind the website to build the membership pages. All of those things cost money. We've been able to pay a bit of that money back over time, interest-free, thanks to Pippa for doing that for us. But that still remains a challenge for us in regards to being able to facilitate and pay down those loans over time. So, again, it's really important that we continue to keep building up that membership base and allow people the opportunity to keep the association alive. In terms of cash in bank as at today, just to give you some idea, there's $251 in the bank. Now, of course, membership renewals are happening on a day-to-day basis. So, we have different sort of spikes in when revenue is coming into the association, but that just, reminds us of just how tight it is and the financial contributions and those donations play a big role in keeping us solvent and keeping us alive. So that is, a really important message that those special donation revenues that we receive from people like yourselves and those who may be watching the replay on this are really important to keep the association active. To give you some context of our current operating costs, they're around $1,300 a month when you factor in all of the, the sort of tech support. We do have a virtual assistant that works out of the Philippines to keep our costs down, to manage the info at Picker website and do any of the sort of administrative stuff when people's, membership site isn't working or their logins are not working or their credit cards expired and so forth. So that's important to note. It also is important to note that Picker remains 100% volunteer run, so there's no remuneration or any type of costs being recovered by any of the national board directors associated with that. So if we run an event, there might be some cost in terms of recovering for maybe some coffee and biscuits, or some type of food that might have been made available but we're talking $100 or $200 to repay those costs. But there's no money received by any of those the people who are volunteering for the association. So that's really important. And yes, I might sound like a bit of a broken record here, but building up our membership base for the future success, both financially but also in terms of how we can influence the conversation and be involved at the decision table, is going to be important for us. Moving along, we can see here that those, again, just a little reminder here about the donations. If you don't know where to donate, it's really clear on the website in terms of how you might be able to provide a donation for us. Turning our attentions now to the membership drive. This is an incredibly important part of our ongoing campaign around adding value to your situation. So we're committed to basically being a strong and united voice for small business property investors who do provide this rental accommodation. And part of that membership growth is we need to bring back those past members and get our existing members to also help them sign up new members. So, virally getting out there, if you know another property investor and they're worried about, some of the regulation changes or some of the implementation of the new compliance rules and so forth. Well, all those are something that if we build a strong association, we can get again a seat at the table and hopefully influence that conversation and that narrative. We need to reset our state advisory council. So on the back of COVID, obviously a lot of that work was dismantled and a lot of people's lives moved in different directions. So we're keen to start building out those state advisory councils as part of that. And of course, our campaigning lobbying efforts make those huge differences. Now, when we're in a fight, that's great, but we prefer to be prepared for that fight, both financially and in a strong position with a big membership base, as opposed to having to come to people and say, hey, the Queensland government's looking at basically doing rental freezes. We need your support and help now. We want to be a little bit more proactive than reactive as part of that particular story if we can. So where is the membership value? Well, it's definitely in those lobbying efforts. And I wanted to just articulate too in terms of how we think about these lobbying efforts. So obviously from our point of view, our main focus is encouraging an open and free property rental or private rental accommodation marketplace. I mean, if you have a private open market, usually supply and demand does its thing, and then people are able to benefit from that sort of market. The more interference, macro-prudential regulations or changes you make, the more artificially you impact the market, and you have unintended consequences associated with that. And right now, some of those unintended consequences are there might be a lot of people thinking about property investing, but they're too scared because the governments of the day are flagging that they might make changes to the way in which investing is operated in this country, and that's too much of a risk. So they'll take their investment dollars and put them elsewhere as part of that. And we're seeing also that happening on a state-by-state basis where there are better conditions to invest and provide private rental accommodation in other states and territories than say Victoria as an example. And so we're seeing most people move in the short term into those particular areas. So broadly speaking, we believe in an open and free market, and with that comes obviously the opportunity for those players in the market to find value and to invest accordingly. We want to protect negative gearing. We think that is an essential small business claim that can happen in other areas, and it should be no different for property investors. In terms of private rights ownership, you own the asset. It's no different than owning a car. If someone took your car and never returned it or returned it in a poor state, I mean, why do those, sort of rights occur for those people? But obviously, when you're providing rental accommodation for people, those rights need to be different. We're not quite sure why that needs to be the case. The small business rights, of course, we want to be entitled to all of those small business rights as part of that. So the advocacy, we want to advocate and lobby for government and regulators around the commercial and regulatory overreach that we're seeing potentially, and again, those unintended consequences that come off the back of that. And from our point of view, we want to ensure we get the balance right between safety standards, so our tenants who we value very much, the vast majority of us value very much those tenants in terms of them having quiet and safe enjoyment of the property versus the overreach in terms of over-regulation, over-conditioning, which brings in huge holding costs, which ultimately end in higher rental costs for our tenants as we have to pass on some of those costs to our tenants. Furthermore, in terms of those exclusive webinars for our members only, they are important. So we'll continue to bring in high quality guest speakers who can talk about their subject matter knowledge in certain areas. We'll always make those recordings available at a later date on demand through the website. We also get requests for things like market updates and outlooks, expert investment tutorials and investment strategies to invest, update on lending environments, latest property management changes, prop tech innovation and technology changes, etc., etc. So from our point of view, we try and get at least 8 of these a year. In some years, we've been able to be better than that. In others, during pandemic years, we've been a little bit softer on that particular thing. But if we can get sort of 8 or 9 of those out during the sort of active months of the year, say between February and November, we put ourselves in pretty good shape in terms of adding value for your $5 membership or your $25 membership for your 5 years. Continuing on this theme, I would encourage you all to have a look at the information resources that we have created. So we have some really excellent resources around, research and due diligence websites. We're continually updating that based on feedback from our members. There's obviously podcasts that you can listen to. There's obviously maximising tax depreciation and tax planning tips, property investment tax time checklists, property management interview checklists to pick the right property manager to look after your asset and look after your tenants for you, and just generally building out your property investment team and the knowledge associated with that in terms of who should be part of that particular team as you embark on your small business as a rental accommodation provider. So if you haven't checked out those downloadables, they're available in the members only area, and you can work through all of that content and find those and download them for your own benefit. We also have the newsletter done by Kieran and the team, and they do a great job. Again, all voluntary work in terms of it does take quite a lot of effort and commitment to be able to continue to keep producing these. So we'll continue to put them out there, and this is the latest one that I'm pleased to say hit your inboxes this morning. So you should be able to also take a look at that. And if you haven't received that, let us know through info@picker.asn.au, and we'll be able to make sure you get a link to download that. It's available on the website as well. The other value we're hoping to, re-establish is a lot of things are done, remotely and virtually these days, but certainly, back in the day, we were also doing a lot of different meetups in all states and territories. I know Garth and his WA team do an awesome job over in the West, sort of getting people together to meet face to face, to talk all things property, to talk about their experiences in a friendly environment. Again, non-solicitation environment is really important to us. So you can go there and continue to keep learning more and build some friendships and also see how other, investors have experienced their success as part of those particular meetups. Finally, I think of the social media stuff. We've got a Picker only member area where we obviously can post latest information, or if you've got any questions or want to leverage from the knowledge of other members, you can put that information inside the Facebook Picker only group, which will admit you once you're a financial member of the association as well. So rounding that out, to help us grow our membership base, it's really important that we sort of focus in on advocacy, lobbying, those resources, the webinars, news feeds, social media, Picker newsletters, the meetups, and the general information that we provide on the website should be a good advocate for you to be able to go out there and communicate that to potential wannabe members, that we can get them signed up for you, and also for you to see that you get $5 worth of value each year that you remain a member. Let's talk about the road ahead now. I'll just take a moment for a quick drink. In terms of our road ahead, from a national agenda point of view, I'm very much a broken record here, but we do need size and scale for relevance and influence. It's getting more and more important that we are involved in the discussions and the narrative around what's happening for small business private rental accommodation providers, i.e. property investors. As part of that work, this is what we're going to be looking at. So continued threat to rental caps and rental freezes. So it's getting quite political. We want to continue to keep making sure that they don't make any irrational decisions and cause even further unintended consequences. Tenancy reforms, we want to get that balance right between providing safe accommodation and quiet enjoyment accommodation for our tenants. So that's an important one. Negative gearing capital gains tax reforms. We don't think that that debate is over yet. So even though the current government has ruled out negative gearing, which is great news, and I congratulate the federal Labor government for doing that, I think the capital gains tax will always be one that they'll be advocating and looking at. So we want to make sure we're involved in that conversation. Depreciation of plant and equipment for subsequent owners, we think is really important. Those travel allowances, you know, the regulation and also the better deal for property investors remains our core lobbying focus throughout the course of the year. Moving those discussions along, I just want you to also remember that, you know, as small business accommodation providers, we play a vital role in providing accommodation. And yes, don't forget, we also provide direct and indirect employment for the community, and that's also making a financial impact overall in that local community, because being able to provide that rental accommodation means that tenant can move in and potentially get a local job in that particular area as well. So there is a really big benefit that we provide to the 30% of the population to allow that mobility, to also allow for that economic interaction and that economic productivity available. If you don't have accommodation for people, no cities or societies can continue to develop the way that they do. So it really is important to understand that. But continuing on the membership drive and value add, so we need to grow those membership numbers. We need to continue campaigning and our lobbying efforts. We need to continue our educational offering. We'll keep doing that. In terms of how you can help us, we definitely need those volunteers, anyone with some legal experience, anyone with marketing knowledge, anyone with IT, website, social media skill sets. We'd love to hear from you. And I'll leave this on for a little bit, but basically, you know, in terms of those government reviews and all of those submissions that we spend hours on, if any of those things are an area that you believe that you can help with us, please reach out to me directly at bkingsley@picker.asn.au. Would be grateful to have a chat with you and see where there might be an opportunity for us to work together and to get your volunteering services. Looking at the state and territories agenda, in terms of, we want obviously advocates based at the state-based level. So we want to look at those tenancy reforms. They're really important. We want, you know, those state councils to be really driving that agenda locally with their members of parliament and also with their local real estate associations to be able to make sure that we're getting our voice heard. Title and planning legislation, there will continue to be changes in this space as obviously the government looks to introduce more supply opportunities for new properties. State-based taxes and duty reforms, we are an easy target politically to be able to just whack more taxes onto us. It's not politically damaging for them to do that until we get to a critical size, and then ultimately that's where it does become politically damaging for them. So that's why it's really important we grow to size and scale. How can you help us at that local level? Well, reach out and, you know, join the State Advisory Council or establish a State Advisory Council in, say, South Australia or the ACT, or reach out to the Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, WA State Advisory Councils. Run a picker meetup as part of that sort of story to be able to, you know, introduce new people into our association. Help with those research and submissions at the state-based level around those policy reforms, and talk to your local members of parliament. Tell them about us. Tell them about the concerns you have as a small business accommodation provider and how you feel you're being treated at the moment. Those things matter. Okay, that's the voice as part of that particular story. Now, this is a movement towards our question and answers session. So I was wondering, have we received any questions yet? If anyone does have any questions that they might want answered, I'm hoping that I've allowed for questions to be asked inside there. I don't think the chat's available, but certainly the Q&A platform, I believe, has been set up correctly. So if there are any questions that you do have, feel free to paste them. I'll check that before I close out the meeting to see if there are any other questions that might come through. No questions yet. Thank you, Garth, for monitoring that for me. All right, now I get to the more formal parts of the AGM, and that is, firstly, I've got to put the chair report. So the acceptance of the chair report has been read in the minutes of the meeting and so forth. So fortunately, again, I got the proxy votes coming through. So we've got 145 yeses and 0 noes. So I'll take that as the chair report has been accepted. In terms of that, is if anyone wants to second that, they can potentially put that through the Q&A section. So Garth, if you want to second that, or someone else, if they want to second that particular thing. Thank you, Mark. I saw your thumb going up. That's recorded. So thank you for that. Adoption of the financials. They are available for download. They were available for download as part of the AGM compliance obligations. So again, we have that passed. So thank you to those people who put their proxy votes in, 145 to 0. And then finally, as per our constitution, we need to roll over our directors every 2 years. In this particular case, Peter and also Terry was due for renewal. Terry has kindly decided to focus his attention on the State Advisory Council. So I want to firstly congratulate and thank Terry for the awesome work that he did on the National Board, and he's going to put all of that attention and focus now onto the Queensland Advisory Board, which leaves more space for other states and territories to build out their members to the board. I'm in conversations with a very talented person who did some great work, Onning, I should say, who did some great work in WA. So hopefully I'll be able to announce his arrival onto the National Board in February. But we do have Peter, who has elected to put his hand up to go around another time. So thank you, Peter, for putting that up. And I can advise you that the votes for that, actually, it was 144. That's a typo from me, with 1 abstain. But congratulations, Peter, for being re-elected to the board as well as part of that story. Okay, in finishing off, before I just circle back for further questions that may be forthcoming, I just want to make some certain acknowledgements. First, from my point of view, I can't do this work without the continued commitment and efforts of for our worthy causes by the National Board. So I want to thank everyone on the National Board for their commitment and contribution for another 12 months. In terms of the state advisory councils, to the chairs who operate those and the members that play an active role in there at the grassroots level, I want to also personally thank them and acknowledge them for the contributions that they're making to the association. And of course, finally, to our members, for, together we will be stronger. We've got to continue to keep pushing that message out there. We'll be able to achieve more meaningful outcomes with a united voice and a strong voice of a growing associations. And of course, from where I sit, together we can help educate and protect others, on their property investment journey. So that really is important to me, with the amount of opportunity and risk associated and the financial commitment that are made by most property investors. You want to get that right. So you want to be able to make sure that if you're dealing with professionals, that they are worthy professionals to also operate with. So that's a big story for me in terms of being able to make sure we're doing that type of educational work as well. I've got a new post here, so let me just move up. There are no more questions yet. Thank you. So with that, I promised that would take about half an hour to be able to roll out this presentation. So I appreciate your time. It's been a little bit longer than that in terms of the time required to do that. But thank you for attending our annual general meeting of the Property Investors Council of Australia. You can find out more information about how we are a strong voice. You can check in with us in regards to, the picker and so forth. Garth, you have your hand up. So I've just picked that up. Do you want to just write your question in the notes in that? Can you do that for me, Garth? Okay, whilst you're doing that, Facebook obviously is another place you can check us out, and also on our LinkedIn page as well. We'd love to be more active in a lot of those spaces, but again, it's all about resources in terms of, what we're able to do and what we aren't able to do as part of that as well. No questions, sorry. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Cheers. Thanks, Garth, for that time. So yeah, again, thank you for attending. Another AGM has now come to a close. So I'll officially call the meeting closed at 1:40 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time. And thank you all again. Wishing you all the very, very best for the festive season, for a safe and happy time over the Christmas and festive New Year period. and we look forward to getting, knee deep into this lobbying and value-adding services that we do for the association in the new year. So thanks again for watching, and all the best.